The aim of this session is to start looking at endocrine disrupting chemicals. And the question we're trying to address is, what are they? And are there real causes for concern about what happens to them when we are exposed to them? Not just us, but animals, and in fact the whole environment. To understand this, we need to actually look at where this story has come from and the kind of impacts it had on the general public and politicians and scientists. The subject has been hitting the newspaper headlines for at least 2 decades. This one from 1997, Why Today's Man is Losing His Virility. So it has a catchy title, catchy subtitle, sperm counts have fallen dramatically in the past decade, big picture of a big man, and a question right at the start, what links organic vegetables, London tap water, gender-bending chemicals, tight underpants, and membership of the mafia? And the answer? Sperm. It's the kind of thing which entices the reader to go into the subject and read more. The headlines have been relentless over the years. Here's another one, jumping now to 2009. Chemicals in plastics feminizing baby boys, says the study. And it gives a cute picture of a couple of kids, again to attract the reader into actually thinking, well, I need to read this to understand what's happening to my children, my grandchildren. Here's another one, 2010. Heart attack risk of chemical found in baby bottles and food cans. And again, to attract the reader in, a cute little baby being fed by the mother. What's this, 2012? Makeup triggers early menopause. Warning on chemicals in cosmetics and hairspray that can cause periods to stop more than 2 years early. So it's playing on people's worries about their fertility. 2015, sunscreen and cosmetics could be killing men's sperm, according to researchers, who found that only 1 in 4 males has good fertility levels. But there's a very happy-looking male because he's having his nose pampered by his girlfriend. This is very similar to the first headline we saw. Sperm count drop could make humans extinct. 2017 now. So what's happened? Since 1997, with that independent article, and 2017, 20 years have passed. Are we no nearer actually knowing the answer? Or is the answer actually very difficult? Another headline to attract the reader. More evidence essential oils make male breasts develop. 2018. Is this true? And here we are, 2019. Let's talk about how the chemicals in cosmetics could affect fertility. Researchers from the University of Aberdeen will share a €6 million grant to investigate how chemicals in cosmetics may affect women's fertility. So, not just men's fertility, women's fertility, cosmetics, all kinds of things. What is going on? And why don't we know all the answers? Why are we still investigating this? We need to look at the science of some of the claims which are made, what we know, what we don't know, and if we don't know things, why we don't know things. To understand where we are today, we need to go back in time a little. Let's go back to the formation of the planet. When did that arrive? Guess? How many years? Well, about 4.5 billion. What about life on the planet? Any ideas? Well, again, a little bit questionable, but probably about 3.5 billion years. Multicellular life? Maybe 1 billion years. Modern humans? Well, it depends how you define modern human, but often estimates reckon, say, something like 200,000 years. So humans have just been here for a fraction of the time that life has been developing. But what humans have done is to change the planet considerably, because, especially recently, we've developed synthetic chemicals. Synthetic chemicals really began to take off post the Second World War. And since that time, we've been flooding both industry and agriculture and our homes with many synthetic chemicals. Is that a problem? The issue really is that synthetic chemicals are new. Life has been developing for 3.5 billion years in its absence, and it's only in the last 100 years or so that man has exposed all life forms to new synthetic chemicals, chemicals which life has never seen before and never been adapted to respond to. So the potential is that these new synthetic chemicals can interfere with, interact with, enhance, detract, but anyway, possibly change any of the life systems on the planet. Here we see the global population of humans over the last 12,000 years or so. Here we have 10,000 years BC up to the present day, and we can see that the population is taking off enormously quickly here. 1950, when I was born, it was just over 2 billion people. Now it's getting on for 8 billion people. And that has been fueled by numbers of things, partly the Industrial Revolution, which allowed us to exploit stored energy reserves, agricultural revolutions, the last one in the 1950s really, where we had the intensive use of fertilizers and pesticides. On top of all that, we've got pharmaceuticals being developed to treat human diseases and animal diseases. We've had plastics being developed as well. Now, all of these things have got the potential for interacting with biological systems. Pesticides and pharmaceuticals are specifically targeted to interact with biological systems. Plastics obviously aren't targeted to interact with biological systems, but maybe quite unintentionally have that effect. Here we see the annual world plastic production. Now, plastics are very good. They're very light, they're strong, they're durable, they're cheap, they've got low electrical conductance, they've got low heat conductance, easy to work with, you can change the properties of them. From 1950, when we started to use them, really up to the present day, the use of them has gone up enormously. It was partly reflecting the human population increase, but also reflecting our use of such a versatile material. Plastics are so useful because we can affect their properties. The basis of the plastic is really a long hydrocarbon chain. These hydrocarbon chains are very strong, each one, and you can add lots of them together. But we can change the properties of these hydrocarbon chains by adding things. We can add plasticizers or hardeners to link the chains. Hardeners will link the chains so they don't slide past each other. Plasticizers will make it easier for the chains to slide past. So we can affect their flexibility, their toughness, their tensile strength. We can add flame retardants to make them more safe. We can add antioxidants so they last longer. We can add antimicrobials so they don't break down. UV stabilizers so they don't break down. So enormously versatile by what we can add. Let's put it all in perspective now of just the one planet. Here we are living in a big city with industries producing many things, including a lot of waste, some of which goes into the water supplies, or the river supplies, which goes into the sea, atmospheric pollutants, which eventually get deposited back onto the land and into the rivers. In the seas we have an enormous food chain of phytoplankton with fish, and this whole thing works. I won't say happily together, but it sort of works. Or does it? Because we're now imposing on top of it new things. Antioxidants, antimicrobials, antifungicides, insecticides, pharmaceuticals, flame retardants, surfactants, plasticizers, UV stabilizers, sealants, cosmetics, adhesives, catalysts, etc., 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 etc. And if we're worried about it, we're worried about it for different reasons. People have different perspectives. You have business having one perspective in terms of employing people, creating jobs, creating a profit. You have the health industry. You have consumers who want things cheaply, but they also want things to be safe. You have an ecological perspective. We don't want to upset this whole ecology, which we all not only love, but also depend on. And then you have political perspectives, which are trying to somehow fudge together all these different viewpoints. What is a science? Let's look at it. Scientific studies of the sensitivity of this whole system really began after the Second World War. Here's Andrew Marr to explain.
To increase food production after the Second World War, there was a massive expansion in intensive, mechanized farming. This, in turn, caused an explosion of pests. Scientists thought they'd come up with a fail-safe, high-tech answer: pesticide sprays. But in our attempts to manipulate nature, we were finally forced to come to terms with the full implications of Darwin's web of life. In 1956, the United States Department of Agriculture began spraying millions of acres with the chemical insecticide DDT.
The DDT was dropped indiscriminately on ponds and waterways, livestock, even on children. There were reports that one beekeeper lost 800 colonies of bees, and a horse seen drinking from its water trough was found dead hours later. The local wildlife was devastated. One ecologist called it an amazing rain of death.
In the small town of West Southport in Maine, a biologist called Rachel Carson received a letter from a friend telling her that all the birds in her garden had died soon after the sprayers had flown over. Carson started investigating. She discovered that the indiscriminate spraying of pesticides was killing not just pests, but insects beneficial to agriculture. And that was just the start of the story.
We poison the caddisflies in a stream, and the poison travels from link to link of the food chain, and soon the birds of the lake margins become its victims, and the following springs are silent of robin song.
Rachel Carson produced the very influential book Silent Spring, a real kickstart to the green movement. She identified that pesticides were a key problem in the food chain, and she said, for the first time in the history of the world, every human being is now subjected to contact with dangerous chemicals from the moment of conception to death. Many of the big chemical companies didn't like her approach and questioned it, but her general conclusions became accepted, and the use of pesticides became very much more restricted. Has it been entirely effective? Let's look at it again. The problem may have been reduced, but it certainly hasn't gone away. This is a headline from February 2019. Insect decline threatens catastrophic collapse, identifying that the number of insect species is going down very rapidly, and blames a number of things, including industrial scale intensive agriculture and climate change, and, although it doesn't mention it, the increase in the world's population and use of resources. So it's a problem which is still there. What are we going to do about it? An entirely different perspective on the effects of environmental chemicals came from the use of certain pharmaceuticals in the 1950s. This is an advert for the use of something called DES, diethylstilbestrol, to prevent abortion, miscarriage and premature labour, although nobody really understood how it worked. Recommended in all pregnancies. Fine, except it wasn't. In the 1970s, there was an increased prevalence of vaginal cancer in the pubertal girls of the mothers who had been given DES. So this is vaginal cancer in girls of mothers who had been given DES many years previously. This changed the perception of toxicology totally. Effects were no longer restricted to just effects of chemicals on birth defects, like thalidomide, but also to the fact that chemicals in pregnancy might affect events that would only develop much later in life. And then in the 1990s, a whole host of things came together, a perfect storm for starting the real scientific investigation of endocrine disrupting chemicals. There were intersex fish being found in, especially to begin with, British rivers. Then there were alligators in Florida with abnormal sexual development. Alligators? Fish? Then there was a story about estrogens coming out of plastics. But the thing which really hit the whole thing off was the story about declining sperm counts. We're going to be looking at some of these issues and the science behind them and what a current understanding is.